The opinions expressed in this program are not those of CISA 7 or Time Warner Cable.
I'd like to start the special board meeting. And I would, do you have the sheet, Katie?
I do not.
Here, grab that one. And I would entertain the first motion.
I move that the employment of staff as presented be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
Becker?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Jansch?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
McCoy? Aye. Wagner?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye. Carried 7-0.
I move that the resignations as presented be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
Becker?
Aye.
Jansch?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Wagner?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
McCoy? Aye.
Carried 7-0.
I move that the transfers of staff as presented be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
McCoy? Aye. Dorf?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Jansch?
Aye.
Wagner?
Aye.
Carried 7-0. Entertain a motion for adjournment of the special board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we'll restart our regular board meeting at 5:30. I just want to let members of the public know that you can view the board agenda and handouts, as well as minutes from all of our past meetings, by going on the district website, which is www.gbaps.org. Click on Our District and then Board of Education. On the left menu, you will find a link to agendas and minutes. And this link will take you to a website called Neptune, where all board agendas, minutes, and handouts from board meetings are housed. First, we have our public forum. This is a time for members of the community to speak before the board. Is there anyone tonight who would like to speak before the board? Seeing none, then we will move to our agenda. First is our teaching and learning work session. That'll be facilitated by Ed Dorf.
Thank you. First thing we have Head Start program guidelines and operational procedures. So,
Thanks. I'd like to bring Sally Jensen and Ann Barsh to the table to share further. But basically, we have an annual document that we produce where we produce guidelines for our Head Start programming. And there were some moderately significant changes this year due to new state requirements, new requirements for us to make sure that we're following child care procedures and policies in addition to the regular Head Start policies. So I'll turn it over to Ann and Sally to answer further.
Good. Good evening, school board members and Dr. Langenfeld. And as John indicated, this is Sally Jensen, our Director of Head Start, our very hardworking Director of Head Start. And as John mentioned, our report, we have two reports tonight. They're program guidelines and operational procedures, and also our policy council bylaws. And what we've done in the last several years is bring forward the revisions or what's new rather than that entire document. And so Sally is going to talk through the background on that, discuss revisions and anything new, and answer any questions you might have. And then we also wanted to take a few minutes at the end to just give you an update on our new Head Start facility and the start of the school year for Head Start. So Sally?
All right. Well, hello, and thanks for having us. Like John had mentioned, some changes to Head Start program guidelines put forth by the Office of Head Start. The Head Start program performance standards, a new set came out in November of 2016, and in that was written that we now need to follow child care licensing. So those are put out by the Department of Children and Families. And so because of that, we had to change quite a few of the procedures that we were currently operating with in Head Start. So I've listed in Addendum A the summary of those changes to the handbook. I've indicated whether we had to revise them or whether they're brand new to our program. The licensing rules that I mentioned on page 6 is new to the program. As a result of our Head Start program performance standards, we were required to expand the duration of services for our children, which is what led me to writing the grant. We received the grant and were able to renovate the new Head Start Learning Center. So revised is our program options, and that is that we are offering full-day programming to, we were funded to provide that for 25% of our 336 children that we enroll. So beginning this fall, we're doing it for 80 of our 336 kids, and we're starting it all on the East Side Head Start Learning Center. The performance standards would like us to increase those numbers every 2 years, with 50% of our children by fall of 2019 and 100% of our children going full day by fall of 2021. So it's been very well received so far, the interest in our families. They're very excited to have their kids full day. Returning Head Start children for another year, the requirement was tweaked a little bit as far as allowing children that are 4K or kindergarten eligible into Head Start. It's a little more stringent with the amount of 4K programming that's available to children throughout the state and the nation. They would prefer that we send our children to 4K or kindergarten and not keep them in Head Start, except for those 3-year-olds that we enroll. Would you like me to go through all of these, or do you want to just, if you have any questions?
When you say by 2021 that 100% of our Head Start students, do we have room at this building, or are we still then going to have to create some more space?
We do not have room at this
Okay.
building right now.
So that'll be an ongoing, something we need to
Right.
look forward.
And I would, hope that the Office of Head Start would come out with additional grant opportunities, because in order to go full day from a double session, you need twice the staff, twice the space, and pretty much twice the money, so,
Right, right.
yes.
So, and then will there be any part-time students at the new building?
Yes, we have 8 classrooms, 4 of them going full day and 4 of them with double session, for a total of 204 children,
Oh, okay.
all starting this Wednesday. Would you like me to continue going through these in a summary, or, okay. So pages 19 and 20 of my procedures manual are new attendance guidelines. Very, very strict guidelines this year that came out about attendance. And if we have unknown reasons, particularly of why children haven't come to school, that we follow up within that hour to find out why children are absent. And then also we do have home visiting staff. We have 7 of them on staff, and sending those staff to homes if the absences are consistent, to find out if the family is moved and didn't inform us, or if there's another reason. So we just basically making a lot more effort to reach out to those families because of the importance of attendance. Bus behavior procedures, we may suspend a bus or a child from a bus now if they have dangerous behaviors or repeated behaviors, or they're endangering other children on the bus, but certainly working with families through the entire process, and hoping if in the event we were to suspend any children from busing, that we would state those children back onto the bus after we've worked with some behavior interventions. Confidentiality of records and student information. This aligns very closely with the district's confidentiality requirements of exchanging information with, with community, with other agencies. Even when we do our initial home visits, if there's other members or friends in the household and the parent chooses for those adults to be present during the home visit, then we need them to sign a release of information to share any information. Drop child guidelines. We are allowed to drop children in a certain amount of time if we haven't heard from the family, in order to make room for another child that is on the wait list. Behavior management guidelines, again, in the event that a child engages in behaviors that are dangerous to the safety of any other adults or children in the school, and that we've implemented all strategies to ensure that safety. According to our performance standards, they can be sent home and excluded, but only for a short period of time. And then, of course, working again with the family to get the child back into the school and working with those behaviors. We now have certain categories of staff that have to be CPR certified. So in the past, it was perhaps a handful of staff at every site, and now staff that work closely or hands-on with children on a daily basis are required to be CPR certified every 2 years. New staff orientation, quite a list of orientation guidelines that our staff are required to have before they have contact with children. So we had a full day of staff training on August 30th, right after staff returned to work, and we were able to complete all of the training that is listed here within that first week. Medical logbook, we are now required, I'm sorry.
Question on the shaken baby syndrome
Yes.
prevention. Is that, in what place that these children are, is the prevention targeting? So is it home-based or staff-based?
Well, it's, shaken baby it's primarily for babies. And we don't enroll birth to 3, but because Head Start across the nation does have birth to 3, or what they call early Head Start, they have just written the guidelines that every staff member in Head Start, even if you don't have the birth to 3 population, that you're trained in shaken baby. So what we've learned so far is that it's really great information for us to bring into the homes of our families, the dangers involved in shaking baby. So primarily our home visitors that work with adults, the training that we receive just talks about those frustrations that parents have when children are crying, when their babies are crying, and how to take breaks and what to do in the event that they reach that boiling point and what they can do. So I think for our purposes, it's going to be more bringing that information into our homes and working with our families about it.
Okay, thanks.
All right, the medical logbook is something new that we will be tracking not only all medications or illness and injuries, but we do a physical observation of all children every day. And if we see anything, an unusual bruise or a mark on the child, then we're required to track it in this medical logbook.
This is new just this time, just now?
Yes.
That really
It is.
surprises me.
And this is a child care regulation. This is not a Head Start. So we have quite a set of Head Start regulations and now the child care. Whichever is more stringent, we have to follow. And this one is, in particular, this is child
But
care.
you've been keeping logbooks for medications and injuries anyway.
Always,
Yes,
always,
thank you.
yes. This one is very strict. You have to have a certain type of notebook. It has to be paged, numbered in a certain way. If a page gets destroyed or coffee spilt on it, you cannot tear it out. They're just very strict guidelines of how to keep the medical logbook. We did reach out to Encompass Childcare in Green Bay because we think they're such great quality, 5-star rating childcare centers, and we were able to meet with them and go through some of the procedures that they've been following for so many years on these. Napping full-day students, so any child that's in a Head Start program more than 6 hours now needs to take a nap. So that would include our full-day students. They'll be present 6.5 hours. And it's basically a 30-minute rest period, and we bought individual cots and sheets and blankets for each child. If after 30 minutes a child falls asleep, they're allowed to remain sleeping up to an hour. For any child that does not fall asleep and wants to get off their cot after 30 minutes, they're allowed to get up and do a quiet activity. And then the bedding, again, is they have to have their own individual sheet and blanket, and those have to be laundered once a week. Background
Bless you.
background checks. We've been doing background checks with the Green Bay School District always upon hire of our staff, but something new this year is the fingerprinting. So we've worked closely with Human Resources. Jean Marsh and Randy Etten have contacted Diversified, a company out of Appleton. They came on August 31st here to the district office building. We fingerprinted all of our Head Start staff as well as our contracted staff, which include our bus drivers, van drivers, and there were a few that were absent or unable to attend, so we're going to bring Diversified in once a month, and then anybody that is hired after August 31st will get that opportunity to have their fingerprints done. And all of those costs, because that's a quite costly procedure, will be coming out of the Head Start grant. So those were the large changes to our program guidelines and operational procedures manual this year. Our policy council bylaws, because of our new Head Start regulation, they increased the term of membership that a parent or policy council member is able to serve on policy council. Used to be 3 years, and now it's up to 5 years, or 5 one-year terms. And then included in term of membership, the Head Start program is required to reimburse members for their travel to and from meetings, trainings. We have a group of parents that go and do health and safety checks at all of our sites monthly. So any costs that they occur because of something they're doing for Head Start, we're able to reimburse them. Are any questions about any of those?
You mentioned a wait list. Do you have a wait list now?
We do right now. Yes,
How
we.
many students?
They're all 3-year-olds, of course, and
Yeah.
we have about 50 right now.
Oh.
So we were low in enrollment, and then we started some new recruitment efforts, and they've just been coming through our doors like crazy in the last week. So we will be fully enrolled, and then have that wait list started. And it's not completely uncommon, I don't think, for this time of the year. We always say parents get their elementary children off to school and then look at the little one and think, where can I send you? And they figure it out, and they come to our doors, and we eventually get them in.
What is your attendance rate? What does it run usually?
We are required under regulation to maintain 85%. And overall, I report monthly to the Office of Head Start attendance, and not one month last year did we fall below 85% overall attendance for our program. But we strive for 100%, so we usually fall somewhere. It depends. Winter months were lower. Our morning kids' attendance is lower than our afternoons, and I think it's because of the early morning pickups and getting kids on the bus so early in the morning before we start at 8 o'clock. But again, we're required, if there's a pattern of falling below 85%, then you have to write reasons why and make a plan. But we haven't had to do that in years that I can remember. We've never really had more than 3 months since I've been doing this of lower attendance. So, but you know, it averages more than 85%, but then you always have those individual kids whose attendance is very consistently poor. So it's reaching out to the ones that have consistent poor attendance.
Well, thank you. I know, you know, with working with you, just how involved the reports and the requirements are. I don't think, you know, one person in 100 besides those working with Head Start realize just how rigorous it is, and you're really doing a phenomenal job there. And again, thank you for that. We'll move this forward then.
Thank you. Good. And then we did, we start school on Wednesday this week. All of our Head Start sites will be starting together the double session and the full day. We did delay the full day session by 2 days. We originally, our start date was set for this morning, but we meet every Thursday morning with the contractor and subcontractors, and Mike Stengel and Ann and I, and we could see as we were getting closer to the date that there were certain parts of the building that just were not going to be ready this morning, and we wanted to be a very safe and clean environment for the children. So lots was going on yet today and still will be tomorrow, and then we should be set for Wednesday morning. And with those 2 days, I can write a waiver to the federal government to not make them up, or we can add them at the end of the year. We thought we'd kind of wait and see what the winter will look like with snow days. Yeah. So. All right, thank you for your time.
I just want to say thanks to Ann and, of course, to Sally, because I think that they do such an exceptional job with our youngest learners. I think it's a great first opportunity for exposure to the district in a very, very positive way. And Michelle and myself, we stopped into a training that they were doing last week just to say hello and speak with the teachers since they weren't on site at that point. And they had just a huge, warm round of applause for Sally, knowing that she's a really, really great leader. So we appreciate the work that she does.
I have so much support from this district, so it's much appreciated.
And when is our grand opening of the Head Start?
Well, yeah, we've got to do one of those. I'm thinking around October. Yeah.
Yeah, good.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Next thing we have is public forum parameters, item for discussion, I believe.
Yes, and I think all board members received the email probably 4 or 5 weeks ago or so, with some suggestions and questions about how we run our public forum time. And essentially, the law does not require us to even have a public forum time. The law requires us to open our meetings to the public, but not necessarily to allow the public to speak before the board. But we have allowed for that for a long, since I've been on the board. And but two of the things that I thought that we should discuss are the time that we allot for the public forum, and then also who we allow to speak at our public forum. Currently, we allow any members of the public to speak, whether they're voters or live in our district or not. And currently, we have a 3-minute time period, although I've been a little reticent to stop people after 3 minutes when they come with written prepared comments that they've worked to prepare. And I've always been a little bit uncomfortable stopping people. And but I would like to have a conversation about, is 3 minutes long enough? Should we make it longer? And then I have talked with Lori to say that what makes it easiest to stop people, if we decide that we're going to hold people to whatever time we determine, the easiest way to do that is to have somebody at the table letting people know how many minutes they have left to speak, rather than out of the blue, your 3 minutes are up, because sometimes when you're nervous and speaking, you don't even realize that the time is going by that quickly. So at this point, I would open it up to the time factor. So the questions are, how much time, and then are we interested in having the system where we do enforce that time limit? And I'd open it up for discussion. Chris?
3 minutes flies by.
Yeah.
It really does. The hemming and hawing take up half of that, at least for me. So I'm certainly comfortable in extending that. I mean, throwing a number out there, 5 minutes, but whatever it is, I think we just have to hold to it. It would be unfair to hold to it for certain people at certain meetings and other people at other meetings. No, that's where we get cross purposes, I guess. So, for sake of argument, I would say 5 minutes. I would think it should be sufficient. I would also suggest in there that we somehow ahead of time encourage people to have their comments in writing, so we can look at it later. I prefer to have them in writing and look at it even after the fact. Just listening to it here, yes, I hear it, but with everything else going on. So again, if we can encourage people that speak to put their comments in writing as well as presenting them.
Is there a way to well, I suppose that would be something if someone calls one of us or Sandy or somebody asking, for information about the open forum, that would be a chance for us to encourage that. But I'm wondering if there's some way on the website, when it says open forum, that we have a little paragraph under there in case that's where people are getting their information about the public forum.
So actually, we were just chatting through email about this, that on our website, when you go to agendas and minutes, it takes you directly to the Neptune site, and when you go to videos, it takes you directly to the YouTube channel. And there really is no place on our website under Board of Education that kind of goes just through like the protocol of the meeting. So, so it could have a link to the open forum document, so people could download it ahead of time, the form, and fill it out. And in there we could say, that our preference would be that, to bring written comments with you, that you could leave them with the board after, as well as then the 3 or 5 or however minutes are determined could be on there, so that people have a place to come before they even come to the board meeting, just sort of understand what the sort of meeting protocols are.
Yeah. Could we could also even post the statement that
Yes.
I say, so that people know up front that
Yes.
we're not going to engage and
Correct.
those kinds of things too. I think that would be helpful. I always try to tell people that if I talk to them personally, but I know some people are, a little bit taken aback by that.
Yeah, and I think that would just take out some of the mystery of the board meeting,
Right.
that for people who don't attend them regularly, maybe they only can ever come to one their entire time their children are here,
Yeah.
at least they kind of have understanding of, what happens and what to expect.
Yeah.
So,
As far as talking to folks or telling people on the website or wherever, for that matter, about putting the comments in writing in addition to coming here, I wouldn't want to do it in any way that would cause people to limit themselves. Some people aren't comfortable writing things down. I guess I'd like to get it across in such a way that it explains to folks that if you give it to us in writing as well, we can be sure that we're not going to miss any of the important points that you want to share. So I think it's just very important how we craft that message. I would like to see it in writing as well,
agree with that
but
because
I don't want to have it such that, this is a hard and fast requirement and,
Right.
we're going to be grading your grammar or anything like that. But
Yeah.
the idea being that we can be sure to receive your ideas if you've got that in addition to coming in, and I go with 5 minutes as well, so.
Just indicate that it's helpful, but it certainly isn't.
right, or that there's no need for them to read it verbatim either, right? So they may provide written comments, but
Right.
what they actually speak at the table could be on topic, but maybe differently worded, so.
Right.
Yep.
And I think 5 is ample, and I agree with you, we have to be consistent. And we may find people coordinating with other people if they have more than 5 minutes of information they want to share, then they organize. And have more than one person and kind of do a tag team.
Just a thought, we always have the forms here for people to sign and fill out and whatnot. Besides on the website, on the forms here that they sign up, or on the back side of it perhaps, could there be a listing explaining the open forum and the 5 minutes or whatever time?
Certainly, I mean, we can
allotment?
definitely, I know we had
just be one more
already-
place they'd see it.
Right, we'd already added a little bit of information to it recently to help people with some of that, just understanding around open forum as well. So, I mean, we can definitely put some stuff on the back, although I know some people sometimes write on the back of it if they're writing information here, but we can certainly do that.
With the 5 minutes, would it make sense then to let them know also that as they're speaking, that at a 30-second mark, that someone on this will be showing them that they have 30 seconds left?
So we'll have the cards like
minute?
we've had, yep. And so that as a countdown, we can certainly add a 30-second mark in there.
Or
My
whatever.
thought was also to probably have, if you do the, trying to think which one, I think the little timer on your phone, it has a little ding. Because I think sometimes also having that auditory, thank you for that word, auditory, is helpful, because if I'm very, involved in what I'm saying and I'm paying attention to you, I may not be watching the cards, and that may be helpful. It also just kind of maybe tells people to kind of wind it down, too.
Right.
So that's
So you're going to
helpful.
hold up the sign and hum the theme from Jeopardy and people can.
Yeah. So,
I would think there should be some sort of, I'm thinking shot clock in my mind, but some sort of little clock that would show, digital clock that Dr. Warren could have in front of her and, tap it, and it could show on both sides, the time starts and they can see
At the
it.
same time, I don't want to make people nervous.
Yeah.
Think so?
People they're nervous enough. A lot of folks are not, comfortable speaking in the first place, and I wouldn't want to put undue pressure on them. I even have concerns with holding up the signs, if that's going to fluster people and mess up their commentary.
They have in writing, so if they get flustered,
Yeah.
they have everything down, don't they?
I missed all that, Chris. My hearing's going too, so.
I guess I'd be inclined not to have a limit at all. I think if we had a night with a lot of speakers or several long-winded ones, I guess I consider that part of what I signed up for. I think there's parliamentary procedures we could use if there was an obvious, and I'm not saying, I've never seen this before, but if there was some obvious attempt to prevent the meeting from going forward, I think we could make a motion to limit debate or limit the length of an open forum, but it seems to me even 5 can fly by pretty fast, and there were sometimes it's not always things we enjoy hearing but needs to be said, and they can take longer than 5 minutes. So I'd be inclined to not have one and just go to parliamentary procedure if there's, and that would be for something, again, ridiculous. Someone reading the newspaper to prevent us from meeting or something like that, which has never happened.
My preference is to be consistent, because I think we have used this timer when we've known there are going to be a lot of speakers, we've used that system, and then when there are not, we haven't. And I guess I would just prefer to be consistent from meeting to meeting to meeting, rather than, otherwise the person who wants to talk 10 minutes, if they come when there's a lot of speakers, doesn't, but if they come when there's only one or two, then they get all the time they need. And I think, again, I think if we continue to be consistent, then over time, people will just know that it's consistently 5 minutes, and you craft your comments that way. It's if they really have that much to say, they should set up an appointment with someone to talk about their concerns. If it's going to take longer than 5 minutes, which is something that could happen if they haven't gotten their, if they feel like they still have more to say and they have more questions, then from the board table, we can say someone will contact you and, to talk about your concerns or something like that. But it's my interest just to be, my primary interest is that we're just consistent with everybody.
I would rather make the motion to exceed the 5-minute limit than not have a limit and then arbitrarily impose a limit.
Yeah.
Well, I only threw the arbitrarily imposing a limit out for an egregious situation. Like just a ridiculous situation where, like I said, someone doesn't want to, someone's trying to prevent an action from being taken, so they read the newspaper or something. Only an extreme like that. And I think if we're here for an hour of open forum, we're here for an hour of open forum. That's, I suppose
I'd like to explore that, having a vehicle to extend upon request. There are going to be times, and the last thing I'd want to do too is to give the impression that we're trying to stifle that or shut people up.
Right, it doesn't have to be written in stone. If we have a flat 5 minutes, no exceptions, that's a little harsh. But if we have the option, I think it's helpful for the people coming to the open forum to have parameters, to know, because then they can kind of make their presentation as concise as possible, or kind of work for that. But with the option of being able to extend it at the will of the board.
Which I would assume, like, in all but odd cases, I would certainly vote yes. Unless, but there would be some protection against a very unusual kind of circumstance, or the same thing being repeated, read over and over.
And that's where the same thing being repeated and read over, that's where it's helpful to have that kind of 1 minute indicator saying that, kind of wrap it up, please. Because they did that when we did the League of Women Voters Forum. They'd have that, the time would go down. And that's helpful. You just kind of summarize.
Would it help if you had a suggested 5-minute limit, but then let the people know if they felt they were going to need more time, to let the board know ahead of time? If you feel you're going to need more than 5 minutes to present your case at that evening, please contact or let us know ahead of time. If you're going to come up and spend 10, 15 minutes explaining something, then maybe we should know ahead of time that that's going to be what's going to happen. Otherwise, an open forum there should be some parameters. But I think if I know I'm going to come and present something and it's going to take me 10 minutes, that's just a heads up for the board, that you just say, please let us know if it's going to take longer. I'm just throwing that out there. And that would cover a consistent, most people will stay within the 5-minute parameter, but if there's somebody out there who needs to have that much time, they have the opportunity to ask for that much time. Or is that too open? I don't know.
That almost goes back to Brenda's idea that, then you make contact and figure out the best way to, that's almost, rising to the level of wanting to be almost an agenda item or something like
Yeah,
that.
okay.
I think we have to respect the somewhat spontaneity of the open forum and the people that feel compelled to make a statement. If you give the parameters, and we've had people who have come to pitch their business sometimes for open forum, and we want to, make certain that I think we want the limit with the option of extending it, because you're right, Andrew, very recently, we've had longer than 5-minute presentations, and we wouldn't have cut those off.
Right. And an unsolicited sales presentation is certainly one where maybe you would stick with the limit, but refer them to the proper department
Right.
to.
Because it's an opportunity to communicate with the board, and that we need that. We need the public to be able to engage us. So I would vote for the 5-minute limit with the option to override the limit.
Does that defeat your need for consistency though, Brenda?
No, I think if we, the publicizing that if you need more time, let us know, to me defeats the consistency. But the 5 minutes, the majority of people should be able to keep their conversation to 5 minutes, because if there's that much more to say, then somebody's going to be following up with them anyway, whoever is in that area. So, but I think having the option that we call 5 minutes and then we take a vote to extend the time like we do when we table things and, various things like that. And then I think by having instructions that say, you bring it in writing, and you don't have to read it. If it's going to be more than 10 minutes, just bring it in writing, and we don't have to explain all that. But if they bring it in writing, then whatever they were going to say that they didn't get to say in 5 minutes, they can just sum it up and say, here's my written comments too. So I think that gives them that option to have a more extended information provided to us.
The orientation to me could be that it's a 5-minute guideline. It's not 5 minutes written in stone. So people know they've got 5 minutes as a guideline. And that way, when they're wrapping up there, if it goes a little bit over, it's not like we have to stop our meeting to say, now we'll vote to see that you can go over for 30 seconds, And if they can't wrap it up within a minute after that 5, then I would say cut them off and make sure it's in writing,
Right.
I'm not here to hear people ramble on and on here. Make your point and move on. Sometimes we'll have people there that start beating a dead horse, and to me, when people start beating a dead horse, they lose their point. So one could argue we'd be helping them that way.
Well, and we can offer the option if what they bring in writing, and I know myself, if I have notes scribbled all over the place, it's not going to be something I'm going to want to pass on, but give people the option of summarizing their thoughts and getting it to Sandy, who will then pass it on to the board.
Which, if you have a lot to say, seems to be a very sensible way to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that clear for Lori in terms of what you're going to put on the website? Do you have any other? Okay, all right. All right. And then the other issue is whether we limit who can speak before the board. I'll open that up for discussion too.
I don't know how you do that, let's say for the sake of argument, I'm divorced and my kids are in another district, and I want to go talk to the board, and that board has something that says you have to live in this district before you can speak here, so I don't know. I could see, you talked about, somebody mentioned somebody having a business presentation. Well, perhaps there could be some sort of guidelines, what's appropriate for an open forum, and you could write in there, no business, proposals or something, but
I think
I
given
don't
the
know.
fact that we live with open enrollment statewide, and our tax structures being what they are, it's hard to suggest that anybody in Wisconsin doesn't have standing in any school district in Wisconsin. So I don't see any need to limit it to saying only if you're a resident of the district or an employee of the district. I think it's just got to be open that way.
I would agree with that. Anyone who takes the time to come to our meeting and speak at the open forum, I think we.
Well, I think too, we have so many community partners and not all of them live in our
Right.
district either. So, you know, we certainly have a lot of people with vested interests in our district who don't necessarily live in our, you know, within the district boundaries. So I would agree with that too.
Well, I think it's a good practice to have people, when they do speak, to introduce themselves and state their address,
Yeah.
so that we have an idea of where they are living.
Anybody else have?
I agree, but I have a different point related to open meeting,
Okay, I think we're done.
open forum.
Yeah, this part. Everybody agree with opening it up? Okay.
Is it just the state, or let's say somebody comes from outside the state? I mean, let's
they
say
could be a
I'm a
recent
grandparent. I
they
go
could-
to where my kids are in
Yeah.
another state, and I'd like to say something important.
Yeah, I mean,
Why
until
not?
we,
I mean, you know.
until we run into some sort of problem with that, I would say yes, we allow anyone.
You know, if somebody starts getting out of hand here, you just
Yeah,
cut them off. I mean,
right.
say, that's inappropriate for this venue, you know, please.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Unless they're from Indiana.
So, and we ran into at least, you know, one situation that I know of where we had a member of the public wondering why there wasn't a board follow-up to some open forum information, and I followed up, and I think others of us checked in with administration to make sure it was followed up, but I think the point is well taken if they want a board check-in as well, but nobody wants, I mean, the reason I didn't make a direct call or follow-up was because I wasn't asked for one, and I didn't think a person would want 7. Now, when I got a direct email, I responded, but then was asked why didn't we have a board follow-up sooner. So I'm just wondering if could we have a situation where, a system where if we are saying an administrator will get back to you, that there could just be it could be volunteer, it could just be rotating basis, that just a board member would also touch base with you? I mean, it would probably be, or a board member would be assigned to touch base with the person, just rather than all of us doing it. And I would think in most cases it was, hey, I'm following up with you, I know that, you know, so-and-so was gonna be talking to you within a week, are things are you happy with the process, or I would think most of the time it would be, yes, meetings have been set up and everything, okay, thank you. So otherwise, I guess based on feedback I've received, I would feel the need maybe to check in with them more often, not because I think their follow-up isn't happening from the administration. The point is, follow-up happens from the administration, at least in one or two cases, people have wanted a board follow-up anyways.
Andrew, I think that point is very well taken, and I think you could do it just by saying the month of October, Ed's going to follow up and then just roll it month by month. But I do agree that there's been times where I've been contacted after they speak, because I think they you know, if you've asked a question or something, they kind of key in on that person. And I do think that that's just a good idea for someone, they're speaking to the board. So someone from the board, and it doesn't necessarily always have to be Brenda or, you know, anyone who takes it on and just says, is everything okay? Did you get your answers? And then we know, and then they can report back to the board. But I do understand what you're saying, and I think that would be a good idea.
Because we don't have districts. I mean, if
Yeah.
the city council, I think one could assume your council person would just always follow up and say, did Public Works get back to you or whatever, but we don't have that.
And it doesn't always pertain to just the schools you're assigned to either. I mean, you could
Right.
go that route, but there's other items out there, so I like that.
I guess you know, I got to think about that for a while. I don't want to get in cross purposes with our staff and any patron here and start going round and round about stuff and get caught in the middle with it. So I think we have to be careful if we go that route. I guess what I might like to see is, for sake of argument, we have somebody speaking here, superintendent says, well, John, Mr. Mangus will get back to you. Mr. Mangus does. After he meets with that person, he emails them, thank you for meeting with me, blah, 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 and copy in the board. That I would probably
Yeah.
like to see even before we get in a position of
I
calling people back.
could start with that.
Yeah. That makes
I think that's a really good idea, because sometimes we do respond and then don't always circle back and close the loop for you. And I think that's very critical, that the board knows what was responded, and then if there are additional questions or concerns, an individual may contact you and you don't know where it was left. So I think that's really important to do regardless of whatever you decide to do as a board, in addition to if you choose to do that. But we can certainly circle back with that to bring closure, so that you know what was said from the management side, and then you can decide, you know, if there's any additional, or, you know, for the most part, I would say, and I don't know how often this has happened with you, in terms of people having an expectation as well that you follow up individually. And, you know, I mean, for a number of years, I don't know that it's happened a lot. You know, people typically, you know, but I whatever works for you, just, I mean.
I don't know that it happens a lot either. I do know that the few times when I have, it's been received very gratefully.
Absolutely.
Very gratefully
I'm sure
by the
it was.
person who's come to the meeting.
Yep. I'm sure.
And I'm okay with that for now. I'm not
Yeah.
saying I agree to it indefinitely, but I think it could be it's a middle ground to start with.
And
That doesn't preclude you from making a contact anyway.
Right.
Right.
Would it be fair to say that within a week, you have somebody get back to that person, if not you, to talk about it? So as a rule of thumb, within a week, we should, as a board, expect be CC'd on an email. And to me, that might be good timing to call a person. I see that you met with so-and-so, you know, how did it go besides what I see in the email?
And if we were to, yeah, I am with Chris that I have some concerns with being in a position where we're starting to do more micromanaging than we should if we're, you know, in that middle position. But I wonder if, and I like the email idea, because I think that that's a way for us to get that information with little work from people other than to remember to copy the board members. But if we were to go with a system where we decide that we're going to call everybody back, I guess my suggestion would be that we pick one person and have from our board and have that person be our community liaison, or I don't know, somebody that's making those calls. And then if whoever that person is, if I have a particular person that I know well, I've talked to, I can let that person know I'm calling. I worry about the rotation system, because that tends to get, you know, is it my month? Whose month is it? Did so-and-so call? You know, the thing was done on the last day of the month. Is it that person's turn? Or, you know, it just, so I would think for consistency's sake, and it's not a huge amount of work, but it would be, you know, somebody that's expected to do that month to month. And if they need help, you know, if there's 25 people that came one month and you want to split it up, then it's up to that person to make sure that they give that to other people. But again, I just throw that out as another idea.
Lori, on our form, does it ask people to identify a preferred means of contact? Either a phone number or an email address or anything, or is it just their street address?
Well, another thought To that end, Brenda, might be that, you know, it could be assigned, you know, you could just, President could say at the end of the meeting, you know, well, Laura, would you get back that person, and just, you know, I agree having rotation could be cumbersome, but, you know, one person necessarily, I don't know if that's necessary. And I don't think, and I don't know that you meant it this way, but for us to be communicating back to people who have come forward is not micromanagement. That is responsible stewardship as far as I'm concerned, so.
Yeah, and I guess I agree, but it's, I don't know, we just have to be careful is all. I mean, I agree with you, but there might be situations where, well, anyway, where we.
We're talking about checking back with somebody, we're talking about following up with a concern
Right.
we brought to the board, and
Right.
that's what we should be doing.
Yes, no, I agree.
Is this the name, mailing address, email address, telephone number? So they can provide all of that.
Okay.
And we could put on the form preferred contact
contact.
or something, preference, somehow have them indicate how they prefer to be
We
contacted
already did
on the form?
that. On the open forum, and I thought we had that.
No,
on
we
the-
did that for a different, we did it on a form, but it wasn't.
For the, when we had the Washington.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
so we
it
did
was just for
that.
purpose.
Because sometimes, you know, some people don't look at their email very often.
Yeah.
So if they're preferred, let them decide how they want to be contacted.
I'd just say from a procedural standpoint, I think that Vicky's not here, but I think that will help us so that we'll know which one of us has the ball, so to speak, and that we can follow through and follow up. I think sometimes when we have multiple people working on the same issue, sometimes people might be working on it very positively, but from different ends and different pieces of the puzzle are exposed. And so I think if one person can work it a bit, but I do think it's nice to have board reach out to check back later. But I think for us to know who's assigned and be able to follow up and be entrusted with that on behalf of the superintendent, that's helpful.
But I mean, we do that typically anyway.
We always do.
So
right
I
after the
do
meeting.
think, though, that to make sure that all the board is included and even note that in your response. So, you know, that would be helpful, that I'm including the Board of Education so that they know, you know, and don't miss that part as well. So,
All right.
So we're done with public forum parameters then?
Yep.
We have another discussion item then, Brenda, is schedule potential board engagement sessions.
Yeah, we had an email from a constituent who was interested in having a conversation about student achievement gaps, that kind of thing. And it occurred to me that we haven't had a formal engagement session for a while, other than the many we had with our referendum. But and we've had them in the past, off and on. They aren't necessarily extremely well attended, but in this case, being that it was a specific request, I'm opening up the idea of the possibility of having an engagement session that would be a separate time aside from the board meeting. And in the past, we've, it can be various format, but usually there's some sort of presentation depending on the topic, and then the engagement session is around a certain topic, so that we don't get off on all sorts of different tangents. So at this point, I'm curious to know if the board would be willing to schedule an engagement session where we would talk about student achievement gap and just have a chance to listen and talk to members of our community around that.
I certainly would be. I think it's a great idea.
So then the question is, can we get it on our calendar? And I think it's in the past, this is a meeting where, I don't think we can get all 7 of us there, because we have a hard time doing that with other extra meetings that we schedule, with everybody's schedule being complex. So I don't know if, obviously, I think you and John and Vicki probably would be nice to have the 3 of you there, and anybody else And I don't know if, are there dates or you haven't looked at anything yet? Okay.
I think that if I could, October, we have budget hearings and community forum for budget. So I want to make sure that people are aware of that as well.
Have those been scheduled?
We're working on that, from what I understand.
So we probably should avoid October. We already
That would
have a
be-
special board meeting on the 16th. And then we have our, whatever the schedule will be in terms of the budget meetings. So I'm thinking if we look into November. For sure, we have to have the budget adopted by November 1st, so that'll end that process. So anything after that would work. And I don't know if, if we want to do it on a Monday, November 13th, or November 27th.
Because we have meetings on the 6th and the 20th.
Yeah. So if we wanted to stick to a Monday, we could do it on the 13th or the 27th, depending on people's schedules. Or we could put it on a different day. Should we just look at the 13th for starters? Do you have Vicky's schedule?
One minor point, did Packers by any chance play it that night? Do you know?
They play on the 6th.
of November.
Six, okay, so,
You mean that's their Monday night?
It's a Monday.
Oh, their Monday night
Sixth.
game's the 6th? Okay. So the 13th is open. Yeah, I don't have it. Does the 13th work for everybody?
Vicky doesn't have anything.
No, Vicki.
Okay, so she's not on vacation or out of town, okay. Well, why don't we tentatively put it for the 13th, and Sandy, if you want to just double check with Vicki, does that work for you?
Sure.
Does it work for you, John? Okay. And then, what time do we want to do that? So I would think no earlier than 5:30. I almost wonder if we should do it
We usually
even
do them at 6.
6, yeah. Thinking a little
So
later
that
would
the
be good.
public can come.
Right, it gives more people a chance to get here by 6 o'clock. All right, so the 13th at 6.
Are we going to have it here?
Oh, that's a good point. No, we could have it in one of our schools, couldn't we?
Good.
We'll determine that.
There's a principal in the audience.
There
who's
is.
Smile
Well,
like a
We won't
hostess
hold
kind
her
of
to
way, or-
it. She hosts a nice event.
She does host a nice event.
She does.
Well, anyway, why don't, we'll leave it like this. You check with Vicki and talk around and decide where would be a good place to do it, and then send us a invite on our calendar, and then we'll know that it's officially set and where it is. Okay? All right, thanks, that's it. Oh, and that's,
Could I ask on one other item for recommendation by the board on a progress monitoring report, slight change that we'd like to suggest for Monday's meeting, along with teaching and learning?
for,
Just for looking forward.
Looking forward,
in 2 weeks from now?
it would be next Monday,
Oh, 1 week.
because of the change in schedule.
Yes, right.
Yes. So during our data retreat, we didn't have an opportunity to fully share the AGR data. And the next 3 meetings we have for progress monitoring are scheduled for overview of our school success plan template, as well as our secondary success plans and our elementary success plans. So that is the next 3 months was focused on that. I'd like us to focus on AGR and school related to school success planning for this next week, but then follow up with the secondary and elementary in the following 2 months.
And this is part of teaching and learning?
Yes, for the
Yes.
progress monitoring
Okay,
report.
so you'll still have or is that for monitoring reports?
Monitoring, sorry.
Monitoring.
Okay.
It's not teaching, and
Sorry.
it is teaching.
It's teaching and
It is,
learning
but
topic.
it's the
it-
monitoring part.
I
But it's
apologize.
the monitoring report.
But it,
So you're asking
But
if,
it fits with our conversation around, conversation with the board on progress of schools, and that's why I was hoping to
Well,
discuss.
John, remind us all what AGR stands for, please.
Achievement gap
Achievement gap
reduction.
reduction, sorry.
It's the old SAGE.
Right,
But-
SAGE,
but
the new
it's-
SAGE.
It's the
But
new
it's-
SAGE.
So we have annually, we report to the board on our progress of our schools. That was something we had slated as a possible topic during our data retreat, but because of the really good questioning we had around the data dashboards and other pieces, that was a piece that was on hold. So I'd like to offer it as our progress monitoring for this month and do elementary and secondary in October and November subsequently.
That works. That's fine.
Great.
Yep. Sounds
Thank
good.
you.
And I think it dovetails nicely if there are specific questions that come up as we prepare for November. This will give us greater insight
Yeah.
as to the direction the board would like to go further in terms of the achievement gap reduction, so.
Thank you. Appreciate the guidance.
You'll give us more information for the engagement session, too.
Yeah,
Yeah, is that what you meant?
I
Yep.
think
Oh,
so.
all right.
That is.
Thanks.
Sorry.
That was the
That's what I was thinking.
Well, unless anybody has anything else, that's all we had for teaching and learning.
All right, then next we have, thanks Ed, next we have our organizational support, and that'll be facilitated by Andrew Becker.
Okay, under business and finance, we have quite a few policies under our 600 series policies which need to be approved. So we can have us.
Oh, sorry, I just want to interject, or I'll forget again, because I've already forgotten twice. I just want to introduce Luke Davis, who's the Intercity Student Council person here. Usually I do that in the beginning, but I forgot. And then, of course, Grace, who's been here many, many times. Anyway, thanks for being here, Luke. Sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
Okay, so do you have opening remarks?
I have just a few. I just wanted, before we start, I'm Melissa Thiel-Collar, the district's legal counsel. Next to me is Angie Robley, who is our director of finance. And he doesn't have a microphone, but our new CFO, Mr. John Cascia, who's here for his first work session. Did I pronounce that right? Yep. Okay. They have been integral in drafting these policies, and also who's not present today is Ellen Krieger, who is my paralegal and the paralegal for the district. She is on a much-needed vacation after drafting and working with Angie and drafting most of these policies and the uniform grant guidance. So these are coming to you tonight as a result of a really quick culmination of a lot of hard work in getting our finance policies up to par for the requirements of the uniform grant guidelines, which we were notified this summer as a result of the district's audit needed to be completed, and as well as our uniform grant guidance that is coming after we discuss these policies that also needed to be completed for the disbursement of our federal grants for the 17-18 school year. Do you want to add anything, Angie?
No, I think that pretty much sums it up. So uniform grant guidance, I know we had a little summary, and basically what that is it's just some rules and guidelines that are coming from the feds that we have to follow when we are working with all of the grants that we have in the school district. So it's not that we didn't have anything or we weren't following any procedures. We had the procedures, we just had to formally put them down in a document. And now the big thing will be getting them out to the grant administrators and out to the staff that are working under these grants. So basically training and going through these, the policy manual that we've come up with. But first we have to come to you for board approval.
Just for clarification for the public, the grants that you're talking about, maybe you could share some examples because sometimes people don't recognize what they are.
Sure. So the grants that we're talking about, a little bit different than like private donors. So sometimes we call grants private donations to the school district. But some examples of a federal grant would be our Head Start program, which Sally had spoke earlier today. We're talking about your Title I funds, your Title II funds, Indian Ed. So those are just some of the federal grants that we receive, the big ones.
Special ed.
Special ed, yes, thank you.
So I thought we would start and go policy by policy, and if you have any questions or comments, we can address them on those individual policies, and we'll just keep going until you've exhausted your questions, or Angie and I can answer them. Does that work?
Would you be able to give us maybe this is something of very technical nature, and
Yes.
probably in most cases won't affect much of how we, in most cases, probably won't affect too much of how we do day-to-day business, because I'm assuming we probably use good practices here. Could we maybe get an overview of what is likely to change day-to-day life first, just so that we're not
Sure.
Spending time on a policy just to check it off, if there's some of these that we've written down what we already did.
I think the allowable cost is probably a good example. Do you want to walk them through how that will look?
No, that's under the uniform grant guidance. It's not.
It's not in here? Okay.
Right, it's
Okay.
not an actual policy. I think the biggest policy that I think that you would see some change in is the procurement and purchasing policy. The big thing there is we're still coming to the board for any aggregate purchases over $100,000. That's not changing. However, the federal requirement to go out for RFP is a little bit, I guess, a little bit more lenient, you would say, $150,000. So anything under $150,000, we are going to, or we're recommending that we do a bid or a quote, but we don't necessarily have to go through the RFP process. So that really is the biggest change that I've seen through the policies that we currently had. But most of these are brand new policies that we've never had before. So, I mean, but the purchasing and procurement policy has been out there and was out there, I think, a couple years ago. We did a lot of work to get that one out here. So that's the biggest change that you're going to see.
For some of you that have been on the board for more years than others, you'll recall about 10, 12 years ago, the board and the district went through a conversion exercise, converting what were the letter series policies through the Wisconsin Association of School Boards into the number series policies. The 600 series were the last to be converted. So on most of these policies, you'll see an approved in part date from 1983. That's going back to those letter series policies. So we did have policies in place in those letter series. They were just never brought to the board for conversion to that 600 series. So that's, most of these policies you'll see tonight are really just the last of the conversion of those policies.
So why would we choose to, if we're good with $100,000 being the cutoff for RFP? I mean, we can be more stringent than the federal guidelines, but why would we back it off to 150 and do just bids instead?
We're just suggesting that we follow the federal guidelines, so we don't have, I guess you're following two different policies, one for non-federal funds and one for federal funds. We're still coming to the board as an aggregate purchase for $100,000. That is not changing. It's just really whether you're going out for a formal RFP process or you're doing the bids and the quotes. So we're consistent, so we're not having to follow two different policies for federal funds and non-federal funds.
So if it's $110,000 for non-federal funds, do we do a formal RFP? Or just bids?
I think it's from, let me grab what was existing, so I have it right. So before bid or quotation for a service or equipment was $50,000 to $100,000, and then an RFP proposal was $100,000 or more. We came to the board for $100,000 in aggregate or more, so you would see the RFP with the $100,000 or more for a purchase. So now, all we're doing is we're still coming to the board for $100,000 in aggregate purchase. However, it may not be a formal RFP. You're going to see a bid or a quote from 3 or more vendors.
I guess I'm not seeing the need for that. If the board likes 100,000 as the threshold,
okay,
the more stringent requirement meets federal guidelines. I guess I don't know why we would.
The old policy also, Andrew, it differentiated based on service, equipment, and construction was at $200,000. So we're taking that $200,000, we're making that $150,000 for an RFP.
Okay.
So we're making it equal for all of those.
That's fine. I thought I just don't want to loosen across the board. If we're pulling a lot of things together into a. Okay.
Streamlining all of those.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions before we delve into the policies? Did that help?
Yeah.
A little bit, okay. All right, so the first policy is policy 620, which is the annual operating budget. And this policy is just putting into writing really the annual operating budget process that we're going to begin in October, and in the adoption and approval of that budget process.
I just have a question. I'm just needing, under budget revisions, which is, it's on the very first page, bottom of the very first page. Can somebody just provide an example of how that would play out? The A, bullet point A.
I'm going to defer to Angie or John.
Does that mean after we've adopted a budget and we have to change something in the budget, it comes through an amendment process? And 2/3 of the board have to vote on that? It can't just be a majority vote?
And I believe last year, if I'm not mistaken, right, so, you know, the former CFO had brought all of those budget revisions in June, and then you had to vote on them. Those were the changes of, you know, revenues and expenditures. That could be new grants that came on board. So we did that. He chose to do that once a year. I do believe that the CFO before him chose to bring those amendments to the board once a month. So that's what the proposal would look like. So that's the things that are changing to the budget. We bring them once a year in June, and I know we posted it. We posted it in the paper for those budget revisions, and then it was adopted by the board.
Okay. And the 2/3 requirement has always been there?
Yes.
We just haven't run into trouble because it was unanimous?
Right,
Okay.
right.
And then the subordinate, the next bullet then, the changes in subordinate line items. So those are things, what constitutes a subordinate line item compared to something that we would vote on? I mean, I have a guess, but I'm just wondering how far down the line item does it become subordinate?
Just beyond the function.
Okay, so teaching and learning, professional development has.
Versus a supply, so it would just be.
It would be anything under the professional development, all of those things that are spent, whether it's sending people to conferences, buying supplies, hiring consultants, whatever, all of that can be changed without a board vote?
Correct.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Now, it's my experience, the changes that I've done and Angie presented with 2 cases were more frequent than once a year, just for your reference.
Okay.
And that's what Alan had done as well. He brought them more frequently than just in June.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions on 620? Okay, policy 623 is on the implementation of the budget, and it talks, provides information related to the implementation guidelines. Any questions on that? No questions? Okay. Policy 640 are school funding sources. And then 640 rule, which is the procedures for federal program grant application proposals. And this is directly related to those requirements in the uniform grant guidelines.
Will this change any substantial parts of our day-to-day activities in these areas?
No, this is the process that we have been following for grant proposals, for new grants coming. They do come to you with a budget to the board for approval. So this won't change anything. This is just formalizing the process that we already follow.
So for example, when Sally applied for the large Head Start grant last year, she brought that for your approval. We're not required to bring grants that we have already been approved for, so that's why you don't see the Title I grants or the Title II grants, because we have already been approved for those, and those are just reapplication every year and the redistribution of those funds.
And it only counts for the federal grants, I mean, we get a lot of grants from non-federal sources. And do we follow a similar process with them as to what's in here?
Internally, we have a process for the application of those private grants, and those are required to be approved by the supervisor, then they come to the cabinet for approval and approval by Dr. Langenfeld, because in most cases, she's required to sign off on those grants.
So it's very similar. Then.
Very similar process.
Okay.
Yep.
They're significantly smaller.
Yes.
And then policy 652 is revenues from investments. Any question on that? Okay. Policy 662.2, petty cash. And this is largely just codifying what we're already doing with respect to our petty cash here in the district.
Are people still using that with P-cards? My gosh, I don't think, my last few years, I don't think we had a petty cash.
Angie just had an email out to the building principals to bring their petty cash to DOB tomorrow when they come for the principals meeting. Student fees. Oh, student fees, I'm sorry.
Yes, but most of the schools do still use a petty cash. It's usually around $250, but anything under $25, if, a teacher wants to be reimbursed, they bring in their itemized receipt and then they can be reimbursed right at the school. Yep.
So in the same vein, 664 is cash in school buildings. Any questions on that?
Well, the policy is just basically saying that we have to have procedures, so we're just putting what we already do into rules, or are we changing anything there?
I don't believe we're changing anything with how we're already handling cash in school buildings. Right. Policy 671.2 is expense reimbursements. Any questions on that? Policy 672 is the procurement and purchasing, and then Rule 1 is procurement methods, and Rule 2 is the purchasing and bidding procedures.
I would agree with Angie that this is the single biggest change or document.
Any further questions on this one?
I guess I'm going to the Rule 2 with are we only stating in, I guess I'm going to E on page 2 of Rule 2. Evaluation criteria shall be identified prior to the request for proposal. We're just giving a list of potential here. We're not saying what must be used or how much weight it must be given.
Correct. And this language is actually in our existing rule on request for proposals. These are typically the evaluation criteria, but I think if you've seen, for example, the RFPs that Diane's department puts out, it has many more criteria for evaluating those RFPs, specific to the actual RFP and the product or the service.
So you probably would, but wouldn't necessarily include, but not be required to include. I guess it seems to me there's at least 5 of these that you would universally want to have. Mm-hmm. And in practice, we probably use all 7 plus more. I guess my concern I'm thinking of is of a technical and mathematical nature, so I'll address it separately.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that we're not opening a door to having fewer things on here because it's just may include.
May include, but is not limited to.
Right, may include, but is not limited to, but really you could have 3 of these things and that's it and not be an actual violation. But we're not going to, so I'm not too worried about it unless it comes up.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, policy 672.51 is suspension and disbarment of vendors. And this is related to uniform grant guidelines requirement as well.
Related to what?
The UGG requirements, the Uniform Grant Guidelines
Oh,
requirements. Which are not boots.
These are very rare. Or not as
Yes,
rare as
this
one might
is-
think.
Yeah, I have not come across this.
We discussed that.
Yeah. Policy 673 is payment procedures. Any questions on that one? Policy 681, fiscal management and internal controls. Any questions? Policy 682, financial reports and statements. This is already being complied with and done. Policy 690 is school properties disposal. And then the corresponding rule, school property disposal procedures. Any questions on
Have
that?
we had a policy?
We
like
have not
this
had a
before?
policy related to disposal. It was largely handled, Dave Teet largely handled disposal of property and followed much of this in disposing of property.
Okay. But this was a requirement as part of?
This is a requirement, correct, especially with respect to property purchased through grants. How is that property disposed of at the end of its life cycle?
Anything else on the 600 policies? Katie?
In practice, do we exercise trying to find, to repurpose rather than just simply disposing?
Sure. Mhm. Yes, I mean, my understanding is for sure, you know, the former director of purchasing, I mean, they have a slew of things, you know, desks and chairs and things like that that they try to get out to the district before purchasing. So I think they do try to, you know, we're not just selling everything, but, you know, things that we can use throughout, you know, other buildings in the district, we make sure that we're doing so.
But even like I'm thinking of seeing dumpsters with textbooks in them.
Mhm.
I mean, do we work to try to exhaust, you know, if somebody could use them rather than
Yeah.
throwing them out? And I understand some things just.
Yeah.
Mhm.
No,
Become
I know
obsolete,
that
but-
there are certain things that always, you know, some of the product and safety in some of the desks and things, they eventually are not in good shape. I know we redistribute things. I also know books, for example. We just recently worked with the Rotary, who sends things to other countries if they're not, you know, so trying to make sure that anything that's useful, I have to share with you, I would suggest that Dave Teet was very, very good to make sure that he could maximize what we have. And, you know, would go out online and to try to sell things and as well, and repurpose things. I know that, for example, the whole media center right now at Barrett was in another school at one point in time and then repurposed, and I know that somebody just shared something else with me. So trying to make the usefulness of something,
I was
really.
really surprised at one point to learn about the market for used textbooks. I mean, some of the textbooks that were being sent back were so old, and you know, warehouses were saying, oh, we can sell those. So, wow. So there's places a lot worse off than others.
There are, I mean, if you don't have
Yeah.
any,
Mhm.
something's better than nothing, depending on that.
Okay. One question, if I may, just so I'm clear with everything you brought here. Everything is basically current procedures that you've been doing for several years, other than the RFP for 100K to 150K? So everything else has been there, okay.
Okay.
If I can just add, there are a few other 600 series policies that we are not bringing tonight that we will be bringing at some point. We had a maximum bandwidth of what we could get done to bring tonight with respect to the requirements of the Uniform Grant Guidelines. So those will be coming at some point, hopefully in the near future.
Then we have the Federal State Grants Procedures Manual.
Okay, same introduction as the policies. This is what we're required to have adopted by the board prior to September 30th for the disbursement of our 2017-18 federal grants. And again, a huge thank you to Angie and Ellen and John for their work on this. It was quite a bit of work. We used a lot of different examples, and we also conferred with Paul Dennis from Schenck, who was a great help as well in getting this done.
Any other questions on this? Okay, we'll move that forward. Then we have facilities and referendum projects updates.
I think Mike Stagel's going to come forward. I also want to extend my gratitude to Angie and Ellen and Melissa. The 600 series was not an easy series to put language around, and that has been a huge bulk of work, as Angie has kind of done double duty waiting for John to join us. So I want to publicly thank you for that. She worked tirelessly, so thank you. And Ellen did too, but she went on vacation. So she had the right idea. So, anyway, so go ahead, Mike. Mike is here to give us an update. I know that he put together a document for the board recently, and it was recommended by Board Member Wagner that we bring this forward publicly, and I thought it was an excellent idea, so here we are.
Okay, well, just to recap some of the projects that we've completed this summer and some of the work that we have coming up. So during the summer, we always have projects that are part of the facilities budget that are done out of district funds. So we completed things like replacing the chiller at Wilder, McAuliffe, we replaced the water main, Southwest, the elevator, things like that, the stage floor at West, which we had some complaints about. We had some emergency repairs this summer, like we had a water main break on a Saturday at Doty, which we had to repair, and things like that that come up. So those have all pretty much been wrapped up for the summer. This summer we also had several energy projects that we did out of the energy exemption. Aldo Leopold, we completely replaced the mechanical system there, along with the mechanical system, heating and air conditioning, which had new ductwork, which also allowed us to put in new ceilings, new LED lighting. So the classroom environment was greatly improved. We did a similar project out at Frabel, where when we bought the school, it had an older mechanical system in there, so we replaced the heating and air conditioning in that school. Actually added air conditioning because it didn't have any, and Aldo was one of our schools that also didn't have air conditioning. So we added new ductwork, new ceilings, new LED lighting. We also replaced the exterior walls of the building and new windows. The building was a steel frame building, so the exterior walls were basically a panel system, very little insulation. So we had the opportunity, since we were doing the mechanical systems through the energy exemption, to rebuild the exterior walls and put new windows in also. So those projects have been completed. There's a little bit of work that the contractors are finishing up in the boiler rooms and adjusting things, but basically those are completed. The other project we're working on as part of that energy exemption is Edison, where we're in the process of replacing the boilers. And then the next phase would be replace the chiller. We're waiting for the cooling season to be done before we replace the chiller. The way the weather is, maybe it'll be sooner than later, but we're thinking towards the end of September we'll be able to turn off the chiller and then replace that. And then the next phase of Edison would be to do some replacement of the air handlers in the air mechanical rooms, and some ductwork that wasn't insulated, and some upgrading of some of the units in the corridors. That work will be taking place during the summer during the school year in the mechanical rooms, but and any work that's being done like in the corridors and classrooms would be done in the evenings, and then the rooms would be put back together, ready for class the next day. Next week, we'll be bringing the next phase of energy projects. which we brought to, had a preliminary hearing with the board a couple weeks ago. And those will include upgrading and adding air conditioning at Eisenhower and Webster. Those are our last two schools that do not have air conditioning. So when we get complete with that, all of our schools will be upgraded with air conditioning. The other project that we worked on this summer, which Sally and Ann talked about, was the Head Start building, where we converted the UW Extension building, which was originally a school, turned over the years it's been turned into office space, so we turned that back into classrooms and made it appropriate for Head Start by adding things like we added bathrooms in every single classroom so that the students, would not have to leave the classrooms. We added new public toilet rooms, a new kitchen area. So there was quite a bit of updating, and that project is now being completed. So that's pretty much what we've done over the summer. And then, yes?
The energy efficiency projects that the Eisenhower and Webster that are for next summer, are those, I know the energy efficiency allowance and things is sort of up in the air again. Are those for sure, or are we still waiting on legislation?
Well, with Madison, I don't think anything's for sure. What we've heard, the latest we've heard is that they're going to be putting a hold on it for the 2018 calendar year. So anything that we can get under contract before January 31st, we can do. Then we cannot put any new projects out through 2018, and then starting January of 2019, we can start them up again.
So even though we wouldn't do the work until potentially summer, if they're under contract to start by before January of this year,
Right.
then it counts.
Technically, next week what we'll be doing is bringing you the contract for McKinstry, and that will, if that gets approved next week, that will meet the requirements. It does not include their subcontractors, which then they go out and bid it out to mechanical and general contractors. So as long as we approve that contract prior to the end of the year, which we're trying to approve it before the end of September to make those deadlines. Now, if something changes in the budget that we don't know about, then we'll have to make those alterations. But at this time, that's what we've heard, is we have to have it approved by the end of the calendar year.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, other questions?
Okay. Just was going to bring up a few, give you an update on our referendum projects. So last spring, we went out and we had, broken out the projects into two phases. So the phase one projects, we met with the schools, we met with staff, we had some community meetings out at Baird, got input on what they were looking at for these projects. Then throughout the summer, we've had bi-weekly meetings on some projects like Baird and Eisenhower and Edison. Others we've met on and off with staff and principals, and we've getting preliminary plans pretty much finalized. What we're looking at doing is at Baird, if everything pulls through, I'm trying to get onto the agenda for the Parks Committee for Wednesday evening to get their approval on doing some land swaps. And then if that all goes through, we're looking at having a staff meeting on the 21st, and then a public meeting to show them the preliminary plans on the 27th. We're also completing, and we pretty much have the plans for Eisenhower done. We met with the staff and the principal last week. We didn't really have any changes, so we will again be working with the Parks Department on the land swap deal, and then meeting with staff to present those plans. We've worked with, on the fine arts, which are the Webster, Washington, and East. We met with those groups in spring. We have some preliminary plans, and I'm in the process of setting up meetings with those three schools to present those to the staff and to the committees. So, and then we're also working on a few secured entrances and then the STEM projects at Wickwiock and King Schools. So those would be new secured entrances in all those buildings.
I think, Mike, one of the confusions out there that I've heard, and I've shared this with you, and maybe you could provide a little more clarification around the fine arts piece for Webster. Could you just talk briefly about where that is currently in terms of the conversations and construction of what we went out for referendum and how that was communicated?
Right. For the fine arts component at Webster, what was part of the referendum, it was to add on a performance space onto the existing gymnasium cafeteria. So there would be a stage added to that area. Building a new room for piano, or we could leave piano where it is and use it as another part of the fine arts, chorus, whatever. They could be interchangeable. And doing a multi-purpose area that could be used for performances, it could be used for dance, it could be used for displays, gallery spaces. So that's, and then some storage that would be part of that fine arts component also. So that is what is in the plans right now for Webster.
Will the performance area make the gym bigger, or just will be tacked on to the?
The gym will stay the same size. We'd add a stage to the exterior.
Okay.
So, well, actually, for performances, it'll make the gym bigger because now they will not have to set up a stage inside the gym. It will be tacked onto the exterior.
Okay. Anything else? Chris?
Let me go back to a certain point. You said in two nights Wednesday you're going, is it before the Park and Rec Committee of the city?
Yes, we're working with the
Is
parks.
that made up of city, what do they call it, city council persons? Is that what there? That's not staff
No,
in Park
this
and
is
Rec,
the-
it's
the city, the Parks Department Committee, the Parks Committee.
okay. My concern is in the past, relationship with Park and Recs, it sometimes has gone slowly, and we certainly don't want to be held up by any bureaucracy, shall we say, within that department. If you're going to that, you said you were, not if, I would hope somebody from the curricular area could go with you to that meeting.
Right, I did talk to Ann Barsh right before the meeting, and she has it on her calendar.
Thank you.
Brenda?
Does that require a vote then at city council, or how does that work?
I really don't know. In past, when we've done some minor things at the Parks Department, once it got approved by the Parks Committee, that was all we had to do. But I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know if they take it to the City Council and they approve it after the Parks Committee. I'm not really sure.
Anything else? Okay, thank you.
You want me to-
I was going to say, maybe you could update the board when you find that out, so
Okay.
we know the next steps and where that's at, in,
Well, I
the
guess
Friday
that could,
update.
Part of my concern here is when I heard that the meetings are being set up at Baird for the 27th of the month, I initially assumed it was already completed with the city, and now I understand it's not. It seems to me to be very hard for us to go before the public until that's completed. So I would hope that they follow through in a positive manner with you on Wednesday.
That is our hope. I mean, they've asked us to do a number of items like baseball fields and reconstruct certain parts of the park, and we've agreed to do that as part of the reconstruction of the site. So we pretty much have done everything, or agreed to do everything they've asked us to at this point. So. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
And then we have the Boundary Committee Guiding Change Document Draft.
Thank you, Andrew. Before we get to that, I did want to talk just briefly about the task force. I know that many months ago, when we had the secondary task force up and running as offshoot of the facilities task force, the conversation was, okay, then next we're going forward with the boundary task force. So just to kind of frame this up, I think one of the things that we've got a number of questions that I would like the board to provide us feedback with and for. I know that a number of you are willing to serve on the process of the representation on the board or the task force, but I think one of the things that as we look out to different boundary task forces across different communities, the range in size has gone anywhere from 7 to 20. And so I put that out there just for a thought as people move forward to create the task force. One of the considerations around makeup of the task force are the various groups of individuals. Typically, you'll see parents, you'll see community members without children. You will see sometimes an application process where they will ask for individuals with special value add that they would bring through, or they might be mirror for represent the district in terms of students and so forth. So really thinking about and looking for guidance. I would assume, and there was conversation when we had the facilities task force, there were a number of individuals who would like to serve on the boundary committee who voiced that. And again, I asked, Lori and I talked about it today. I'm not sure we would know who they are, but if that's the desire of the board, we can certainly go back and reach out to those individuals again to see what interest is part of that original hardworking facilities task force. Then also the secondary task force that took place and the meetings were over at Preble. There were a number of individuals as well from our community who voiced interest. So we would be, if the board supports it, we would reach out to those folks to see whose names would come forward. And then also, if there is a desire for a nomination process, I know the last time the board did nominate individuals as well. And then the other piece that often you see is an application process where community members can just go online and sign up and identify one or two reasons, why I'd want to serve and some of the things I would bring so that when we bring the three, I think there were 3 board members who had indicated their interest in creating this committee, that we would have that a host group of names to bring forward and could put that application process out there as well. Bring that forward next week to bring it to this table during my report, and then people in the community would be invited to either self-nominate if they hadn't been nominated. I mean, sometimes you get people that nobody's thought about, but they were excellent, to be considered. So I put that out there. So if the board would like, we can reach out to the facilities task force, the secondary task force members already who participated, and then also bring forward an application process next week with just a couple of questions. Most times they're very simple, but it does afford maybe broader voice sometimes than maybe just through a nomination or previous experience.
Yeah, and I think Chris, Andrew, and Ed, you're the 3 that had said you would be part of that committee.
The review?
Yeah, the
Okay.
review committee.
And choosing, okay.
So, go ahead.
Michelle, are you looking for the size of the committee tonight too? Are you?
Well, I think when the team gets together, I mean, I'm just sharing that typically you see anywhere from 7 to 20 is about, once you start getting in huge numbers. I know there was, I think it was a finance committee Dan Nearad had one time that was super huge.
No, it was a facilities.
Or facilities.
The
Long-term enrollment
the
management
enrollment
task
force
yeah.
committee.
I
Yeah,
think-
that one's- how many did you have, 50?
We had over 50.
Yeah, that was big.
And Mike and I sat in just as
Yeah.
observers, not.
Well, and what we're seeing in terms of best practice that other districts have given advice is the recommendation that the board sit in any and all as observers, that staff are part of, just as the board, in terms of advisory to provide and give input in terms of presentation and data and information, but not be part of any kind of decision-making or recommending, just to be able to provide whatever the board needs, or the community group needs in that discussion as well. So being there as a resource as opposed to participant in terms of the recommendations that would come to the board.
I was going to say that I just think that that you'd be best, or it would be better to go toward the high end. If you're going to go, I would go toward the 20, simply because I think on both task force that we've had in the last year, my recollection is that there were quite a few people interested in being on this task force. I think this is can be a volatile suggestion of redistricting. I think that there's going to be a lot of interest. Sure. And I think the first people that should be considered would be the ones that showed interest, who gave the time on the last two task force, that they roll forward, and that I would go toward 20 versus 7. I think you're better off with this district. If you want to limit it at 20, I just think more is not 50, but 20 seems doable.
And I think that would be up to the 3 board members as they're looking at who came. I think the other piece I would offer is that, talking with other school districts as well, what they did that was helpful is they determined the dates. And we were looking and talking about Wednesdays. I know that typically is a religious ed night. I think that the piece around it is that there's also then not activities, so that you wouldn't go to miss your children. You know, it's kind of one of those things. Not sure where the board sits on that, but we were looking to see if we could, have a series of monthly meetings and put the dates out, because sometimes people then can make a better informed decision based on their schedules. But I'm not sure where folks are at with Wednesdays, if that's a good day or if there's a different date of the week. And I don't remember what we did for facilities, Lori.
They were Thursdays.
Okay. And were there conflicts then, or?
Some. But we had listed it out too, that there were 4 or 5 meetings all in a row, and so it was every Thursday for every week.
So they were close together. These will be more spread out because there's more time, but there will be a lot of information to consider and absorb. We anticipate we'll have to tap on the shoulder folks from the city and from the county to give presentations. Obviously, we will have a Guide K-12 tool, which will afford a lot of different looks at the data as well. So really wanting to make sure that we have time in between to be able to gather further information and data, so that this is a very well-informed process, if that makes sense. Yep. He's in charge.
Thank you. I like what you said about our staff being sort of on the sidelines. The last committee I was on, they sat at the table, and in hindsight, that's not a good visual, because it looked like it was dominated number-wise. It was number-wise by our staff as opposed to people from the outside. I'm assuming, to be on this committee, you need to live within the district?
I think that would be a board decision, but it certainly makes sense.
And the next thing I would ask that if they don't volunteer, I'd reach out to the Brown County Taxpayers Group and the business community, perhaps through the chamber or something, so we have those representatives on there. I'd rather have them in the tent than outside.
No, I agree. And I would say that anybody who's on that task force would go through that application process, even people that have been on prior task forces, because My concern is that you'll have over 20 from prior task forces potentially, and then you might have other people that come in with, really good lens or a really good body of knowledge that they've worked through other things, and I'd like to make sure that the three of you have, the ability to maneuver and pick the committee as you best see fit.
I'd just like to reiterate what Dr. Wagner said as well. I feel that with the secondary task force, we're looking for broad committee membership that had technical expertise in a number of different areas related to, facilities and transportation and ESL and special education. But there was a sentiment that I shared as well that it became too dominated by other parties as opposed to parents and community members, and not from a lack of interest or trying, but I think it's good to have a higher number of parents on the committee if at all possible, and residents.
So as far as the buckets that we'd be looking for, we've got business, Brown County taxpayers, parents, community members without children. I think that one has popped up. Are there any other areas or buckets that we would?
How about former board members? Would that be?
Good. Yeah, I'll put that out there too. I think the other thing that we learned that another district nearby had used that is a really nice touch, and they said it was very well received, is at the end of all of these task force meetings, they had an open forum. And so community could come and observe and then ask questions and offer input or what have you. And I guess that was very, very well received. So at the end of each meeting, I think they'd go from 6 to 8, and then they would just have an open forum, and people were able to ask questions. So they brought people along on the way too that may not have been on the task force, but were very interested and maybe couldn't attend all the meetings, but wanted to have some voice. So, yeah. Okay. So next week, what we'll plan on doing is bringing forward an application form that would reflect that, and then we can make sure that we get out to those targeted groups so that and get those dates out. Any feedback on Wednesdays? Is that going to be problematic, or would the preference be a different day of the week? Or, I think sometimes the consistency of the day is nice. However, periodically that precludes people because they might take a class. Yeah. We were just thinking on Wednesdays, typically, kids don't have activities at night, so, and we don't have competition.
I don't know that the religious activities night is nearly as universal as it once was.
Right, but we know we don't have games and we don't have performances. Okay, all right, okay. I think that helps a lot. So with that information, then if we could go to the guiding change, and really what this is intended to do is we think about this work. I think the first phase will really understand what we would hope that the task force would do is really understand the current realities around our enrollment. And a lot of the things you see in the context and the why, actually, many of them came right out of the facilities task force, that the board already put this information out there, really looking for at enrollment inequities across the district, where they are, what the capacities look like currently. And so they were all part of that facilities piece, talking about more about that potential growth. And so probably having some folks from the city and the county come in and talk about that. Really delving into what our enrollments look like in terms of the educational landscape and having conversations around that. I think one of our challenges is really looking at that mobility piece and then looking at the instructional practices and programs and how they all fit in terms of not only what's there today, but the future. And then looking at our current feeder school attendance. Obviously, we came across some concerns and issues just recently around that this summer, and really looking at if that's the desire of the board to make sure there's a streamlined result in that, to look at that. And then looking at any projections, where we're increasing, where we're decreasing, programs that aren't equitably accessible for all students, and then looking at transportation routes and traffic patterns. So that's we have some areas that we can improve on. In the middle, really, it's the considerations that you would want when examining the boundaries. And this particular bucket really looks at what is the how? What should they be looking at, how to get there, and taking into account, and talks about the importance of fiscal responsibility, looking at what's best for kids and taking into account the district's mission and vision. Again, looking at feeder patterns, what the laws state, enrollment capacities, really looking at that to drive the decisions, making sure every voice of stakeholder group, we just talked about that, and then making sure that the programming and services that meets the needs of the student populations being served in the school attendance area. So making sure that we have those opportunities that really best address the needs of the kids being served in that neighborhood. And then the last bucket is really intended to talk about the what. What would the solutions really look like? And we talk about the alignment, again, to the district mission, vision, and strategic priorities based on the best interests of students. One of the things that has come up is making sure that the attendance areas are contiguous. Right now, there's some things in our attendance areas that may not necessarily be as contiguous as the board may want to look at. And then the natural boundaries. I think one of the things that when we talk to other districts and look forward to other districts, they talked about boundaries should be easily understood. You should be able to look logically and say, oh, that's why they did that, kind of thing. And so that would be an important piece. Making sure we're ready for any future growth. Being fiscally responsible. Transportation is a bucket it's a real important piece of this, but also looking at where enrollments are shifting and, what's going to happen in certain school areas, neighborhoods. Flexible and affording a school capacity to expand and contract. Board policy is a consideration. This one is a little challenging, and we talked about it quite a bit, but how do you minimize the need for a lot of future shifts, when you can't quite anticipate what's there? So really trying to get as much data as possible for consideration, so that at the end of the day, we at least can predict out at least a good 5 to 10 years. That would be the goal. And then aligning to the feeder patterns, state and federal guidelines, again, developed using the data to drive the decisions. Supportive neighborhood schools came up in the past, the assumption being that the board still wants that. That has come up, and then taking into account making sure every voice is heard. So really looking at these as far as where that charge would be around solutions. And I don't know if there's other things missing or things that didn't fit what you were thinking that we should take off or add to this document. And again, what we could do, I know this is the first read of it, it is a draft. We'd be happy to just have you look at it for a while, think about it, and add anything and that, so that we can bring it back next week. Is it next week already? Mm-hmm. Yeah, next week, and then, to take it out of the draft form, if that makes sense.
Yes, 2 things if I may.
Sure.
Time now? Okay. This may be in there, but, just in case. In the middle, we talked about best interest of students, and I might add families in that.
Okay.
So you're not splitting families up in some way. To think about that, and again, maybe you considered in here already someplace. Yep. And the second item, and again, this may be in here, but I'm certainly not interested in piecemealing kids all over the place. You know, if we have 100 kids too many at elementary, 20 here, 30 there, 40 there, I would not be interested in that. So I can't speak for my colleagues here.
Just clarification on the first column with the Y. Fourth from the bottom, current feeder school attendance for elementary to secondary in some schools is not ideal. Are you talking about the feeder patterns there, or what is that referring to? It is, okay.
It's the feeder patterns, when you have 6 to 8, how many schools? 7 elementaries here, and then some of them split, and you live on one side of the street, you go to this school, and then.
I thought that's what it referred to.
Yeah, I'm sorry, we'll bring further, that's what it's intended to say, but we.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, that's what it means.
Why is that difficult?
We're seeing, we talked about that early on with, I think, Lombardi and stuff. Mike Stengel's the one who, we worked through that when we took a look at boundaries in Guide K-12 and saw that we've got some travelers who have to go across the river, and sometimes it just makes it difficult for families.
Well, quite a few. I mean, the kids
Yeah.
at Langley,
A lot of them
40%
go.
of them have
Right.
to cross
Yeah,
the river.
Across the river.
Across the river.
Might even be more than that.
Yeah.
Well, that's not news, but-
No. But I'm just wondering, I mean, the reason I ask is because I'm always, I would like us to not place the river as a natural boundary that we can't fudge with. Because I think that really, it really limits what we can do in terms of boundaries that make sense. If we say, nobody can cross Walnut Street to get over on the other side of the river. So I understand why that's there, and but I just want that not to be a limiting factor as we look at options. Because it may be that there's a perfect option that requires, a river crossing, and if we provide transportation, to the elementary kids that are doing it, or the middle school or whatever, then I see that as a potential solution. Not where I would, not that I would.
The river crossing to date is only at middle school and high school students.
Yeah, that's what I mean, and we've always limited it, we don't have any elementary students crossing the river, but I don't have any preconceived notions of who would cross. I'm just saying that I think that should be an open topic and not a closed topic, the possibility that kids would cross the river.
I'm going to disagree, I think. I just don't think it would be acceptable to the public, and I would consider elementary school mandatory cross-river borders. That would be a dead-on arrival if it came to me for a vote.
Because.
But I just don't think it'd be acceptable to the public. I think there's something about, these are smaller schools, I think it's not realistically a neighborhood school. It's not as walkable, it's, for elementary. That I wouldn't rule out, now if there's a choice program, certainly I would hope that people cross the river for that, but that's a different deal, I guess. I just can't see it being.
You don't want to see it.
I don't think it's a neighborhood school. I don't think it's a neighborhood school anymore if you cross the river, just because it's too difficult.
Yeah, see, and I would tend to agree, but I just don't want it to be a drop dead, we can't even consider this option when we have elementary kids that are currently being bused from fairly far away from their school.
Yeah, I guess
from
I wouldn't tell the
neighborhoods
committee. Yeah, I
that,
wouldn't tell the committee, I guess you
Yeah.
can't suggest it, but I can't imagine a circumstance where I would vote for just saying X, elementary school X is now on both sides of the river, but.
I don't know what other people, so far it's.
I guess I'll
Other
withdraw,
people
I'll withdraw
think-
I
Okay.
wouldn't put it as an absolute on this document.
Yeah,
I'd just be
that's all I'm
unlikely to
saying,
support
right?
it, yeah.
I would agree with that, but.
I think what what we would envision is the recommendations. There is no perfect solution. There won't be any perfect solution, but I would anticipate that there would be different chunks of solutions. If you did this, then this kind of thing. And, if you align all your schools, this is what it would look like. And then I would assume then, once the board looks at all of their options, in terms of solutions, then we would take them out to the public and start having public hearings on them as well, to get further feedback from that as well. But
I just want to say that I like the format of this. I think it's very clear, and I think that there were some comments in the last two task force that everything was too. It was coming from looking at this all from this very big perspective, and a lot of people wanted to come in and get in and really get to the meat and potatoes of the subject, and let's fix it. Let's see what we can do. And I think with the guidelines that you have on here, that gives them a very clear cut. Okay, this, and this. It's not too high up. You are saying this is what you're here for, and it's very easy to follow. And this is what we're going to do. Not so ambiguous that they're not really feeling they're part of it. It's just like they're just talking. I think this is going to make a big difference in how this is run by having this out there already.
One of the things I wonder about is in terms of the scheduling of the meetings, to schedule them in such a way that in between the monthly meetings, there would be an option to come to the board. And not to say that they have to come to the board every month, but there might be some things that the committee is toying with and looking at, and they're going, oh, well, I want, like the river thing, I wonder if the board would even be willing to consider this. So I'm wondering, the timing of it would mean that would have to, if it's on a Wednesday, well, I guess we can put it on the agenda the next day for the, if it were the following week. So if you have the meeting before either our work session or our regular board meeting, and then popping out of that, the committee says we need to find out from the board, if they would consider these as options before we do all this work, and then find out that we were going to slam the door from the very beginning. So I think that would work well.
yeah, we
could have a standing agenda item, actually, and then if there's nothing that they need to come to us with, we just, not have it.
I think so. So we can stagger those dates. Okay. Thank you.
Then we have just a staffing update.
Yes, I'd like to just pass around.
Do you have a microphone, Jean?
Oh, yeah.
What you have before you is a similar document that you've seen before. And what we've done this year is we've added the dates as they've gone out, as we've talked with the board. So at the far right side is the most recent information on the open positions. And I know of the greatest concern are the classroom positions. We have 4 classroom positions open in secondary regular education. There is a 6th grade position at Lombardi. There is a Franklin Social Studies, the Italian part-time position at Preble, and then we just had a resignation this past week at Aldo, so there is an Aldo position. And we right now have either emeritus teachers or other teachers assigned to these classrooms while we try to fill these positions. Then in special education, we have 3 vacancies there at East, Howe, and Lincoln. And we're still working to fill those positions and have other teachers in them.
Jean, I actually had someone had called about they had seen an ad for the Italian
Yes.
person, and are you offering Italian classes at Preble? Is that what it is?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
That's one of the languages.
Is that new this year?
No, it's been going on for at least, 5 years, I think.
Okay. I did not know yet, and I was going to ask tonight anyhow,
Yeah.
so this came
It's a
up.
regular contracted position that we offer on a part-time basis. Yeah. And then the other positions in the administrator managers, we have a family engagement coordinator in special education. We're interviewing right now for the director of procurement. There's a accounting position, and then there's one other position that could be accounting procurement, but it is vacant and it was due to retirement.
Any other questions?
Now, do these include positions that are that are currently being filled with, I'm gonna go right to the specific here, speech language pathologist. I was given to understand that we brought 2 people out of retirement. That would mean there were 2 vacancies there, but it only shows up 1 here.
I'm not sure. I know that we do have 2 people in emeritus who are SLPs who are looking to do some hours. But I'm not sure.
Wouldn't they show up as vacancies?
They're not
full-time FTEs.
Okay.
So do you have 1 full-time FTE or 2 part?
There's one at East that I believe is full-time, and then I believe there's one at Preble. I don't know if she's full-time or not, but you've got a retired teacher at Preble. Is she full-time? So that's 2 full-timers then. There's one at East and one at Preble.
You're correct, I'm sorry, yep, you're right.
Okay, but it only shows 1 here, so
Okay,
what's?
we'll make a correction.
Anything else? All right, and then that concludes the organizational support.
Right. Thanks, Andrew. Next, we have a closed session. I'll meet, what? Read that motion. Special board meeting closed session has been scheduled for Monday, September 11th, immediately following the adjournment of the work session meetings pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, and pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851F, considering financial, medical, social, or personal histories or disciplinary data of specific persons, preliminary consideration of specific personnel problems, or the investigation of charges against specific persons, except where paragraph B applies, which if discussed in public would be likely to have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of any person referred to in such histories or data or involved in such problems or investigations, to wit, personnel matters. The meeting will begin in open session to consider the appropriate motion for a closed session so provided by law.
So moved.
Second.
Sandy?
Aye.
Short.
Aye.
Dan.
Aye.
Malloy.
Aye.
McCoy.
Aye.
Wagner.
Aye.
Warren.
Aye. Carried 7-0. We'll meet across the hall.